Christopher Pike's, the way that Christopher Pike is suddenly just drawing in all these different kinds of things. It strikes me, it's not exactly the same as folk culture, but it's not the same either. You know, that they exist on a kind of continuum with each other, I think.
Humans are a storytelling race. And everything pretty much connects somewhere. Yeah. Like the Hookman. Everyone's got a Hookman story, right? For me, it was Hookman and Percy Priest Lake. I knew a guy whose cousin actually was killed by the person who Hookman. Everyone's got a Hookman story.
Oh, bloody, what do you call it? Bloody Mary.
Bloody Mary.
Right?
Oh, Bloody Mary. Still can't do that.
Stop saying it.
3 times, too.
Good point.
My younger son's elementary school, you know, that was the story. It was in the one basement bathroom. They had this tiny bit. That was where she appeared. And I remember saying to my son, "Look, man, it's just like a kind of story that's attached here." And he was like, no, but it's really, this is this is point zero.
Point zero. Point zero at the other end. Michael, cut your breath. Tell us a little bit about how folklore works for your stories, or it might have influenced you, or
Gosh, what do I say? Well, I was also deeply scarred by In Search Of and watched it religiously a lot too. And you know, it's like I don't really have a rich folkloric background because I'm from Los Angeles, so I mean, it's not exactly the same sort of a place. But so my folk background, I realized at some point, was crappy '70s horror movies with bad film stock, murky colors. You know, lens flare, the octagonal lens flares when you pivot the camera. I was like, that's kind of home for me in a way. When I see those, I'm like, oh, I'm back home. But I did grow up in the '70s, early '80s, and well, grow up, it's a relative term, but the point is, the satanic panic was going on, and there was Satan was everywhere. And my family was not religious, particularly my father's an engineer and is he's not a militant Dawkins-style atheist, but he wasn't interested. But that just meant I had no training in these things. I had no sort of repertoire of counter moves to the, it's like, well, should I cross the knife? Maybe I should cross the knives. What do I do with the knives?
Don't cross the knife. Conversation, for God's sake, Cisco.
Exactly. So yeah, it was like, so you had to kind of wing it, but I did, just as I think you mentioned too, just haunting the library when I was a kid, reading the folkloric books, the thaumaturgy books, whatever they had, and just being fascinated by these stories and and what I liked about it was the way it sort of resisted the way the world tends to get disenchanted as you age. Yeah. Like, well, yeah, I mean, this is pretty normal, but out there somewhere, things get interesting. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name in the middle. You're speaking about the Blair Witch Project.
Yes.
If I could ask a question, and it seems like, okay, it's not real, but it seems as though what they did was they captured kind of the reality of how folklore happens, if not actual folklore. They captured the way folklore happens. You have a suggestive story. I mean, but they kind of, what's interesting about it is they kind of recruit the audience to actually do what happens in folklore, which is you hear something and then you embroider it a little and do your own version of it. And I guess that's what I find most interesting about it. These are like stories everybody tells, but no one invented. Like, no one person wrote this, and we're not repeating a Poe story or something. It's a story that everybody wrote, everybody tells, and that is alive and just mutates and continually adapts to new conditions and circumstances, which is why arguing the folklore is pointless, because it can always respond to whatever criticisms you throw at it. So, people wonder why people still look for Sasquatches. You can't not. It's just like, as long as there's 2 trees, he could be back there. So you really have to work hard to kill that. And why would you? So in my own writing, it's like trying to capture something like that. And there are many writers throughout time who've been interested in that, from like Borges to Tolkien to Lovecraft, to all these various writers who are inventing their own folklore, but drawing on folklore. To create their own stuff. I mean, Hawthorne is always talking about, well, it was said, or people used to come, or the scuttlebutt was so-and-so was a witch, right? It was never, there was, used to be a witch and she lived here. It was always, well, everyone says. And so there's like this social dynamic built right into it. So that was really interesting, and then various things I've done. Like I have a story, it's pluggy I guess, but my latest story was, I out of jealousy over Stephen Graham Jones's meteoric success, I knew I had to do a slasher story at some point. God damn it, Jones. So, I wrote one, and again, the slasher is a folkloric figure, like an 80s folkloric figure. And so I realized I didn't want to tell his story from the point of view of him. It was what everybody around him was saying. We don't hear from him. And so that's sort of one way it's influenced my work, is the idea of the story. I'm not writing it. I'm just kind of capturing a moment in its life, but it's bigger than what I'm just writing about.
So what does that do for our fiction, for those who are writing fiction, to capture part of a folklore story? What does that do when you're putting it in there? Do people have to know what the story was in order to enjoy your fiction?
I don't think so. Like I said, I think humans are a storytelling race, and folklore is like the tap root. If you tap into it, it can go into anywhere. I mean, it's just what we are, and it's what story is, how story lives. That's the blood of stories, is what we all know to be true out there somewhere. Don't tell me it isn't. I want there to be a Jeff the Talking Mongoose. I want that so hard in my life. I know it probably is, but I don't care. I still want one really bad. But that's what I think it is, and it helps to, it enriches and connects us. I can write a story, you can be completely alien to it, but that one little vein will connect it to you because you had a hookman or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you have to know the whole story
No.
to make it work. I mean, you can see that in isolated areas, for example, like the mountains in East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, East Kentucky. I'm sorry for my coffee breath.
No, I'm just making sure that everyone can see you.
Nobody needs to see me. So, isolated areas, like the mountains, especially even as early back as 10 or 20 years ago, there's still places where I grew up. I grew up in a town with 90 people in it.
Wow.
And I'm 40 years old. That's it. It was unincorporated, which is very common in places like that. You'll go to each different holler, and for anybody that's not from these areas, a holler is a valley. But it's a goddamn holler, so you call it a holler. You go to one holler, for example, I grew up in a place called Stat Branch. The next one over to the north was called Long Branch. And you'll hear the same story, but it's completely different. But it's about the same exact individual witch or the same exact creature. But all they knew was they had a fear of something deep in them woods that was not supposed to be there. And they had heard somebody say, witch. That's literally it. And that is exactly how folklore works. Like it's just oral tradition passed down.
And puts a name to a fear.
It does. And that's it. That's perfect.
And I'm just gonna follow up one more question then. What's the point of doing that? Of putting the name to the fear? Fun?
Well, to get people to not do shit that they shouldn't do.
That's exactly it.
Again, so back when I was a kid, you had a lot of people growing shit they shouldn't grow. Back up, I'll give that as a perfect example. Back up in them hollers. And now it's more myth related than it is marijuana, because marijuana's become legal everywhere, but it'll never be legal in Kentucky. Anyway, it's not my
We're
issue.
actually working on that. Just FYI.
Well, good luck.
Yeah.
But you have stuff up there, or you're doing stuff up there that you don't want people messing with. So you say, I think there's a witch up there, or there's a cave back up in there. Haunted coal mines, for example, was a big thing where I grew up. And one of the primary reasons for it is there's this thing called black damp when you go deep in a coal mine. And all it is it's a pocket of either carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide, depending. And it just sits there because it can't move. And if you go into it and you inhale it, you'll pass out, you'll die, because it's oxygenless air, essentially. And that's why they would carry canaries in there when they were young. So all the parents would say, you need to stay out of them old abandoned coal mines. Either they'll collapse on you or you'll hit black damp. But nobody believes that, because I went back and looking for bats for as long as I can remember. Nobody cares about that. But you tell a kid that there's a witch back in there, and it's going to scare them shitless. So they won't go. I mean, that's kind of, to me, what it always has been.
If you add a name to it too, in these instances where, you have this variation of a story that may go across the country, it may go across the world, and everyone has them, there's also something to be said for if you're writing it from a certain perspective and you're capturing it in that moment in time, putting a name to it that's something that people within the region recognize. Like if you're just storytelling, there's something that gives you a cohesive feeling within that community as well. You know, we're both from Kentucky, and so it's like when you throw out some of this coal mine stuff and all that, it's like there's this immediate feeling of like, yes, we have this history, we have this like specific recognition. And when you put a specific name to it that's maybe regional, you're forming that cohesiveness, but it's also something for everyone to recognize who recognizes their own version of it.
Naming gives a power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the producers of Blair Witch, when they were coming up with the story, they called Ben Rock, who they wanted to work on the film, but he pitched it to him as if it were real, like he was pitching it out there. So he called him up and he said, "Hey, we found this, we got this footage of these 3 student filmmakers who disappeared in the woods up in Maryland. They want us to put it all together. It's based on the local legend of the Blair Witch." And he was like, "Wait, tell me the story again." And he told him, and Ben's first response was like, "You're gonna die." Like he bought it hook, line, and sinker. And then he was like, "Do you mean the Bell Witch?" And he's like, "No, the Blair Witch." And then and so Ben is from Florida, but he knew of the Bell Witch. So he knew of the story, was completely sold a bill of goods about a fake witch, but he knew what was happening. So those kinds of stories permeate everywhere. You hear about them, and you might not have experienced them yourself. You may not be from that area, but you know, you've heard of something, whether or not you've seen stuff like In Search Of. You hear these stories from your friends, or you've read a book. So the fact that you can completely make up a story, but it's parts of it are rooted in reality that people can grasp onto, it makes them real. Mm-hmm. Even to someone who probably should have known better when he got this phone call, but he bought it hook, line, and sinker, and he was sold. He was like, "Let's do it."
Well, it strikes me, right, that when you write, one of the great mysteries of fiction, right, is that the more specific you are, the wider your appeal, right? And it doesn't make sense, right? You would think that if I want to appeal to all of you guys, I should tell you some kind of generic story, right? But it's the opposite. And it strikes me that there's something similar that happens. You hear the story about this particular event, witch, character, whatever, and you don't have that necessarily exactly in your own life, but it reminds you of something from your own experience, something else that you've heard of. So there's something about the way that our minds respond to those specific details that makes us think, "Oh yeah, right, I've heard about something like that," or "That reminds me of something that my father told me, or my grandmother told me," or whatever. So the putting the name to it, the specificity of it is what helps to seal the deal. By the way, did anyone else see the tall woman at the back?
With the 3 arms or the 2 arms?
Well, she was carrying an extra arm.
I didn't say moves.
I'm pretty sure it was Keen's, but you know.
Would that be okay?
Today, yeah. Cool.
So, does it make sense to think about horror? Something like, think of the movie Jaws is what I'm thinking of. You know, the animatronic thing didn't work in the movie that shows the shark, so they wound up filming the whole movie. You don't see the giant shark until the very end. You knew there was a shark, and your brain was making a shark. But how does that work for us with folklore in our stories or some of these things? Does it refer back?
You like not seeing? Like not seeing? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, in Blair Witch, you never see the witch. It's only because they couldn't figure out how to show it. They couldn't afford it. They had ideas, but I mean, it's the unseen. They're walking in the woods. They find these totems in the trees. What does that mean? They find piles of rocks. They hear children laughing. Heather's running from the tent. She sees something, but you don't see it. Even though there is someone running alongside of her covered in white long johns, she never captures him on film. So it's in those moments that people are like, what is she looking at? And you see Mike in the corner in the house, and something captures both of them and knocks them down. So the not seeing is sometimes more effective than seeing it.
Yeah, I think it's like the basic.
Absolutely.
Oh,
I think it's like the basic.
Really, it can be
All that
filling with
trauma
scary
just dumps
stuff.
it in
Yep.
there.
Yeah, it's like the basic concept of horror, though, is the unknown. That's what scares a lot of people the most.
It's what the darkness of the woods. It's unknown.
Yeah.
Oh, it's out there. All I know, it wants to eat me.
I mean,
That's all I know.
it's like I told you, I don't believe in ghosts, but I can't. It's more like an agnostic thing regarding ghosts or most cryptids. I spent a lot of time in the woods though, by myself in West Virginia, and I can pretty much tell you what's not there. But I can't tell you that it doesn't exist, just because I can't prove it. Right? That's just the truth. That's the truth of the matter. I mean, I can tell you, but I'm lying to you. And when you die, nobody knows what happens to you, and that's scary as shit when you really think about it. It's the same with Jaws, and it's the same with the Blair Witch. Pretty much anything.
Yeah, if you think of the haunting, they never show a ghost in the haunting. The most
Yeah,
you ever-
that's true.
The most you ever see is a door bulge, but mostly otherwise it's just sound. But it isn't necessary. If you saw it, it would actually decrease its efficacy somehow. It's seeing other people see it and how they react to it that seems to matter, and not so much you're seeing it itself. I mean, it's because part of the problem with, if you're going to argue that something isn't there, then you're going to be contradicting a lot of people who really do sincerely seem to have had some sort of experience. And, you know, who am I to outweigh all these people? They all seem to agree, kind of, but with variations, but then the variations make it more plausible, because, and so on and so on. So, you know, I mean, I don't know, like, Sadako coming out of the TV is effective, right? But then again, that's a folkloric ghost. The long black hair, the weird movements, that is a canonical, a yurei, I think is what you, like a vengeful ghost. And I didn't need to know that word or anything about the lore to know that the thing coming out of the TV right now, that's not good. I'm screwed, aren't I? You know, but it's see, that's a purely, as far as I know, purely fabricated legend, but built around the figure of the vengeful, relentless, unstoppable, unappeasable ghost. And so, in a way, it's just a remix of that with some extra stuff involving that crazy videotape. And so you can show people cryptic stuff like the videotape. You can show people, like, there's the guy with a thing over his head who's pointing and people crawling backwards along. You can do things like that if it makes it more dreamlike. It's when you're saying, ta-da, here's the thing, that explains it. That sucks. But when you're saying, did I just see something, and then you don't know what you saw? If you can show me something that I don't know what I just saw, but you showed it to me, how did you do that? You just showed me something, I don't know what, okay, like Field in England. Have you seen that film? Right? People have seen Field in England? Right? You know, it's like, there are these like weird hallucinogenic moments. It's a black and white, if you haven't seen it, it's set in the 17th century in England during the wars between the Protestants and Catholics. And there's, you know, it's all set in one field, and it's basically a duel between like two alchemists, essentially, in a field. And there's all kinds of stuff in there that you have the faintest idea what's happening. Like, but it represents their mental state. So in a way, what you're seeing, it's about as long, and maybe if what you're seeing represents a mental state of, because we know people have these experiences. It's if I dream, if I have a nightmare, I'm not pretending to be scared. I'm scared, and I wake up scared, and I have to tell myself that didn't happen, but my heart rate is saying, that happened, and you know, so there's this weird place, and it's like, that may be where you want your reader to be, right there. He's like, I know this didn't happen, but, and it's like, that might be the sweet spot, right where you want to get your reader. If you can get them there, you got them.
What's interesting about that, I think, goes back to what I think you were saying is humans are a storytelling race. That's how we've survived all these 10,000 years, 10,000s of years, tens of thousands of years. I can't fucking talk. But it's really based on imagination.
Oh, yes.
And everybody has a different imagination. And if you just show them a piece, like you were saying, just a piece,
Oh, they'll add their own on.
I'm going to see something completely different than what you were seeing or that he was seeing. And that's how folklore is born. It's really fascinating to me.
It's fascinating. Humans are fascinating.
Like even with
Well,
Jaws,
they are.
even with Jaws, I mean, the shark. We know that sharks are real. Sharks are out there, but they went and made this thing a monster, and they showed it a little bit, and they showed it. You know, that the point of view of the shark, I think, is what's effective when you're seeing it from below, and you're seeing. How many of you have ever been at the beach and something has brushed against your leg and the first thing you did was jump 10 feet out of the water and you ran? Because you're like, I'm only ankle deep, but there's a shark and I'm running.
The worst is when you hear it in your own pool. It's ridiculous. I'm 40 years old. There's not a shark in my pool. I'm running.
But did you watch that Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, the Dead Man's
Of
Float?
course I do.
Oh, yeah.
See, and that's the thing. You're like,
That's-
oh, I can't even see anything. There's just an invisible ghost that's going to come strangle me.
But it goes to what you were saying. You don't believe in it, but you still turn the lights off and run.
That's
Yes.
right. If I see a well done movie or read a really well done ghost story, I'm the first to tell you I don't believe in that shit. But I will turn every single light in my house on when I get up at 2 in the morning.
How many times have you woken up in your bedroom in the middle of the night and the laundry pile looks
Yes.
like someone's sitting on the chair?
When I was a kid,
Oh, heck, man.
my mom hung a fucking dress up on the closet door. Dude, you talk about scared shitless. I woke up and saw that thing. I screamed like a little girl. She come running back through the house. Said, "What's wrong?" I said, "There's a woman standing over there." My
Or the
mom-
teddy bear falls off the shelf in the middle of the night, and it's like, okay, that thing's possessed,
Yeah.
and you're not touching it. It's
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
stay there until mom moves it.
Ow.
Some of it, right, is its effect without cause, right? It's something happens, and something brushes your foot in the ocean, and your brain needs to make sense out of that. You're out in the woods, and I sometimes wonder if some of this, like we're out in the woods and you get the feeling that you're not alone there, and to what extent is that like a kind of atavistic thing? That this is way back in our deep prehistory, when being out in the woods and being able to sense that there's a predator out here with me. I better get out of here. So I sometimes wonder if we don't have these, whatever you want to call them, holdovers from deep in our kind of genetic history, and we don't know how to process them. Where you're in the dark, or you see something that looks threatening. I can imagine how that would be an evolutionary advantage, Oh, there's a saber-toothed tiger there. Get out of the cave. Yeah. You didn't see the saber-toothed tiger. Well, you're not contributing to the gene pool.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, that's the only time I've ever been scared in the woods, and I've done my job for 18 years in the most remote places of West Virginia and Kentucky, and the only time I was ever scared, there was no cause for it. I just remember crossing over a certain area, just crossing over a certain ridge, and you take one step, and every hair I had at that time, because I don't have any anymore, stood up on end. And I got the creepiest feeling. And then I was just like, I'm not going. I
And
can't.
folklore becomes this way, right?
Yeah.
That we account for that, and we're like, somebody says, "Oh, that place. Well, there was a murder there," and you're like, obviously that was what I was feeling.
I mean, as kids, we're told Santa's always watching you. The tooth fairy knows when your tooth came out. Like, we're told all of these things, good, bad, that there's always someone watching us.
And your parents put the elf on the fucking shelf. And
That's generational trauma I can't wait to see come up in 20 years.
Have you seen the Family Guy episode where the tooth fairy is this like really scraggly man that has just this massive pile of teeth that he or she rolls around in, moans all the time? That scares me. But that was a completely different direction. I'm sorry.
There's an image. So it's interesting because it sounds like we're talking about two separate ways of looking at folklore and the same thing. Sometimes people have made stories like Little Red Riding Hood to keep your kids from going into the woods, just to keep them home, keep them safe, tell them a scary story so they don't go out there, right? And then also you're talking about defining ourselves as different from the others. We see something, we don't know what it is, we're gonna put a name or a feeling or something on that. So that's interesting. Do you think those two tie together? One's intentional, one's unintentional. I don't know.
We've all seen The Hills Have Eyes, Deliverance,
Yeah.
stuff like that. It doesn't even have to be something otherworldly. It just has to be other pocket that's never, The Descent.
Something that's not normal.
Yes.
You're normal.
Yes.
Normal.
Yep. Yeah. Where we become the prey.
Yes, that's a big thing.
That's cool. I'm kind of wondering where we're going along on time here. We could talk about this forever and ever, but do you folks have some questions for our wonderful folks? Oh, there may be a few. Let's start here.
Okay, so my question is, because I have an 11-year-old who likes to watch like creepypastas basically on YouTube.
Yes.
And it kind of made me think of like Slender Man and like all the more modern folklore, I would say. But like, I guess, how do you guys feel like folklore is going to change with like people my kids' ages who watch everything on YouTube and, read stuff online, and like, does that impact folklore in the future?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it
The
has to.
SCP Foundation, all that stuff is great. So interesting. I think it's a way to actually disseminate.
Hell yeah.
That's your concern.
It's to get the information out in a much larger way. Thank you. It's late and I've had only one cup of coffee. No, I think it's great. I love it myself because I'm a huge fan of YouTube and TikTok and all that stuff.
Yeah, it gets exciting when she'll tell me stuff she's
Yes.
watching, but then I'm like, that's so weird because like my mama, I'm from Georgia, Tennessee, like she would tell me stories, but now it's like I guess you're telling the story, but just you're watching a video about it. But
There's not that kind of connection anymore between generations.
Generational
I think
stories,
it's quite
yeah.
frankly, we're just too busy. We're too busy
I
working
try to
2
tell
or
my
3
kids
jobs
those stories,
and just trying
but-
to get through life. And
Yeah.
I did not have the grandma, grandpa who sat down and told me stories. I had to go read them.
Okay.
And my children, I'm the weirdo who tells them stories. They're going
I
like,
do
shut
too.
up the hell up, Mom. I got things to do.
But my
yes.
kids are like, it's like they have so much access to it too that they're
So
not
much
scared
access.
about
No.
anything I tell them.
But
Like,
remember
I'm not
this-
traumatizing them.
Remember the Slenderman murder that happened? Well, the Slenderman attack. She didn't die, but
Yeah.
she was just recently. They did not give her. She wanted to get out. She's in a psychiatric hospital. One of the.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
crazy.
And she's trying to get out, but they're saying no, you can't. You can't get out because
not
she's
ready.
obviously psychotic. She's got issues.
Yeah.
She's both got issues. But I find Slenderman fascinating because I think he's one of our very, very first actual man-made little tulpas we've done recently.
Yeah.
We created him. I mean, and we know the guy who created. He's getting no money from it, which is kind of sad. But it's fascinating. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, and one thing, and also just briefly, if I could piggyback on that just a little bit, I think it kind of, because a lot of the folklore we've been discussing is regional and coming from your background, but TikTok has no region.
Yeah.
So you can,
Everybody.
it essentially globalizes the process of creating folklore. So you can see a kind of, sort of, a new echelon of folklore emerging, which is sort of in interactions between people from literally everywhere.
Which I kind of think can be good because then like we can share better with other people. But then I'm kind of like, do we lose our cultural identity when we don't have?
That's always going to be the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, with the globalization of everything, it happens. This is
Yeah.
going on with everything.
Going more and more that way.
Do you see though, with Slenderman in particular, I always wondered to what extent the design, if you will, of Slenderman is in some way influenced by anime. You know, the sorts of
yes.
exaggerated figures that you find in
He looks like a Junji Ito drawing.
yeah,
Yes.
something like that. So
I think
it's just
so.
that there's an interesting. It's just an observation, you know.
It's interesting.
That's an interesting point. And we had a question over here.
It's actually very similar to yours, because I was 15 when Blair Witch came out,
Yeah.
and so Thursday night midnight showing, when they used to show the midnight showing, those kids had MySpace pages. I went in going, these poor 3 souls.
I know.
And then 12 hours later, they were on Jay Leno's couch. And
Yeah.
I was so angry.
Oh.
I was so angry. However, it was brilliant, as you said. Going off of what you said with like this kind of new folklore, do the filmmakers as far as I could trace back, that was the first meta narrative. Like when it comes to new technology, the internet.
Yeah.
Are the filmmakers aware of that? Like I know like maybe egotistically they would say, yeah, we did it, but like they really did.
They knew that, but it wasn't something they were setting out to capture at the time.
Really?
Like Ed Sanchez knew enough HTML to make a website,
Mm-hmm.
and when they made their investor reel, and you can watch it on YouTube, it's like an 11-minute pitch tape, and they narrated this legend. When that got in front of John Pearson and he put that on split screen, John just said, here's the story of the Blair Witch. He didn't give any context.
Oh Lord.
It blew up John Pearson's website so much it was crashing. That every time that people would go onto that message board, like, we need to know more. We've never heard about this. Like, what is going on? That's when they realized, oh, this is interesting. And it was right in the infancy of the internet where they were like, well, let's make our own website and let's just put information up there. We're not going to tell you it's real, but we're not telling you it's not. We're just going to put it out there.
Throw it out there.
And they
I
just
think it's so cool because it's like I'm very proud to say like I was a teenager when this type of storytelling was born.
it was
So being the creators of that's got to be awesome.
they had a very small window where there was enough internet access for people to get online and spread it. And they just continued to run with it. Every once in a while, they had their own message board, and they were like, "Are you guys going to release more footage?" Like, "Yeah, we're working on it." So they kind of they leaned into it, but they never came out and called attention to the fact that they were leaning into it. And it was, you know, if it had been a year too early, the internet wouldn't have worked. It would have been a straight to DVD or VHS. Had it been a year later, we would have probably been a little bit more skeptical.
Yeah.
So
We'd be Googling it.
we
Yeah, if that happened
we
now,
were
yeah.
you know, the internet was like the Wild West. You know, we were believing everything that was on the internet.
They got me for 12 hours. I was like in tears, like these poor children.
Oh, no,
You know what I mean? Like,
You know.
and there they are in Leno, and I'm like, yeah.
Do you think though, I mean, where Slender Man works, right, is that Slender Man or those sorts of things, right, the sort of TikTok phenomenon, they're not controlled by copyright.
Oh yeah.
Right, so that like when you think about one of the things, the advantages that folk culture has is that if you want to tell the story about what's going on in the next holler, it's not as if or that someone from the next holler comes over and says, "This is our version of the story." You can't say that is our proprietary. Whereas, and so if you think about, I used to work in a bookstore. Every now and again, someone would come in and say, "You got a copy of the Necronomicon?" And I would be like, "Yes, we actually did." There was, but it's fake, and they'd be like, "Sure it is." That's right. That's what big cosmic horror wants you to think.
Cosmic horror.
I wonder though if and you see that right with Lovecraft and his buddies all sharing all that, but that's not something that happens as much anymore. It happens in at the sort of folk level, but at the the level that we're at right now. There's all these capitalism reaches in, right? Lawyers show up and it's like, no, you can't make your own Blair Witch Project because we have the rights to that.
Well, it's like what you said, like the poor kid who created as a college project got nothing. And like the kid's like, I did this on my own as a college project, and now it's it's a global phenomenon.
It's a Halloween costume. I mean, I see Slender Man come to my door every Halloween.
That's not a costume.
I was gonna say.
The Bell Witch tipped him off.
She wants a rock back. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more question, then I want to hear what you guys have coming up. So yes.
Okay, so this is a little specific and it goes into cosmic horror a little bit. And John, I was reading The Fisherman while my friend was reading Moby Dick. And she wrote an article about why Moby Dick is cosmic horror.
Yeah.
But I was so I was curious, I guess, like it seemed kind of like you got inspiration from that. I haven't read Moby Dick, but based on what she was talking about, it kind of reminded me of some of the elements. Like I didn't think I would be interested in reading about fishing, but I was really interested in reading about fishing.
So the question, I don't know if everybody in the back can hear, the question had to do with, is Moby Dick as cosmic horror related to inspiration for The Fisherman? Is that sort of?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we're done now.
Succinct to the point.
Yes, it absolutely is. And the book itself, I just made up a lot folklore, which in a way is like that's the point, right?
Yeah.
But I have had I go back oddly to Edgar Allan Poe, who loved the idea of the hoax. And a number of the stories that we read now, as we know that they're fiction. Poe printed them. No, facts in the case of M. Valdemar. Listen, I'm telling you, there was this guy, he was on the verge of death. We put him in a mesmeric trance, and he remained in that trance beyond death. And there's still, I love it whenever somebody, sends me a little email and is like, listen, does this really exist? I could not find any reference to this thing, and I feel a little bad,
No, you don't.
No, I don't.
No.
Like you make me stronger.
Those are great.
That's so funny.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, I'd love to hear from everybody what you have coming up, or what to look for from you, or where they can find you, et cetera, et cetera. Mike, you want to fill us in?
Okay, coming up, well, I have a novel coming from Clash Books, but that's not till next year, called Black Brain, Brane. And I have something coming on May 1st, I have a story going up on Reactor, I guess it's called now, or Tor.com formerly, right? Which actually is the folklore slasher story that I mentioned, called The Two Musics. And my editor actually did email me and say, I was looking up this guy and I couldn't find anything. It's right because I made him up. I guess it worked. So yeah, that's what I've got coming. tour.com, I get, well, Reactor now, but on May 1st, when the two musics will be live.
So I literally just released this, aptly enough, Folktale is the name of it. It is based on a folktale from Pine Mountain, Kentucky, which borders, kind of separates Virginia and Kentucky, southeast. I did a novel called Sour. It's very much a cross between Pumpkinhead and Pet Cemetery. And by the way, if you've not seen Pumpkinhead, that's one hell of a
Classic.
folk horror
Yes.
folktale. Very good story. The main character in that's based off Haggis the Witch, and I'm doing a prequel to that, which will be out later this year, called The Bone Lady, also based on a real folktale from where I grew up. You can find me at Tony Evans Horror on Instagram. There you go.
Excellent.
So I just released it's a 3-author collection of Appalachian horror out through Crystal Lake. It's called The Devil's Backbone, and I have a novella in there along with one from Ron Kelly, who's like the master of folk horror, and Red Legault, who's also her stuff is amazing. So that just came out in February. Mine has to do with bourbon witches because of course it does. And then I have The Day of the Door is releasing in a couple of weeks from Ghoulish. My biggest concern with that book has always been to make it half as scary as Trevor Henderson's cover. Because it's amazing, and but I do have copies of that downstairs. And then otherwise you can probably find me online, but please tell me to leave. I'm always on X or Instagram or something. Shame me.
Celebrating 25 years of Blair Witch this year. I run the Blair Witch Experience, which is a film location tour from the movie. So every year we go to Burkittsville, we go to Coffin Rock, and we go to where the stickmen were hanging in the woods. And if we go out there right now, there's probably 30 or 40 stickmen hanging there from last year's Blair Witch Experience. We camp out, we go to the Rustin Parr House, cast and crew come out, so that'll be in October. It's probably going to be a pretty big event. We have a couple screenings. There's one in Burkittsville of the Blair Witch Project, September 14th. September 14th.
Sold out.
Last year we had a lot of the cast and crew come out for the first time. It was the first screening last year of the movie in Burkittsville. Second. I mean, first officially big one that, they didn't try to run Ed out of town for doing that.
Yeah, and it's to raise money for the cemetery that's in the movie, so.
That's nice.
Yeah, the cemetery is a private cemetery, and that's the mayor of Burkittsville right there. So we have.
He wasn't making that up.
No, I wasn't.
I thought he was
He really is
making
the mayor of
that. I
Burkittsville.
really thought you were making that up.
So yeah, you can just look me up on all the socials. There's a big Blair Witch fan group on Facebook where all the cast and crew hang out and interact with fans, and they love seeing all the artwork and the short fiction and everything associated with the movie.
Awesome. Well, I have a collection of short stories coming out hopefully into the year called Politics of Children and Other Stories of Revenge. So guess what that's all about. The story with Cat Drug In but the Gin, that's going to be actually included in it hopefully by the end of the year. I have all my books downstairs. And I'm also on all the social medias as well. Nicki Nelson-Hicks all over the place, from TikTok to Instagram, all the places. So yeah.
I've a table downstairs. Come and say hello. I don't. My most recent collection came out 2 years ago, I think, and I have stories in different anthologies and such. I'm shopping around a novel at the moment. We'll see what happens, and I hope to have another collection or two out in the next couple of years. So it's kind of quiet in some ways at the moment, but yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
And I have an exciting announcement to make. My friend Cynthia Quinn is here with us as well. We were 2 of the 5 women nominated for Stoker Awards a few years ago for our short stories. The first time that all of the nominees were women. Well, we got together, started talking with each other and chatting more, found we all had a similar viewpoint on things. We've put together an anthology of stories. It's coming out from Flame Tree in September. And the gist of it is we've been abusing the planet for a while. Women have been subjugated, degraded for a very long time. We sort of reached a tipping point. And so things are changing a little bit. We are growing some strength and they hear us coming. So the 5 of us together put this. I was co-editor with Anna Taborska. We have Cindy O'Quinn, Lee Murray, and Kyla Lee Ward, women from all around the world, each writing stories from their parts of the world. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.